Automated podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So in today's episode, we'll be looking at how augmented reality is being used to improve the efficiency of air combat training. So currently, flight training for the military is both incredibly expensive, can actually be up to something like $40,000 per hour for some specific aircraft, and doesn't often prepare pilots for situations that they may actually come across while they're up in the air. Augmented reality can be used in live training and is a possible solution to these as well as other challenges faced by the military. So to discuss this issue, Glenn Snyder, one of the founders and chief product officer of Red 6, comes onto the podcast today. So Glenn comes from a programming background, which led him to create visual effects for feature films such as Star Wars, Transformers, and Ender's Game. He moved more into the technical world as a technologist and consultant, focused on creating analog experiences with digital tools, and before starting Red 6 was key in a number of leading VR and immersive technology projects. So in this episode, we dive into both the challenges of air combat training, how Red 6 is bringing augmented reality into the cockpits, and what benefits this brings, how artificial intelligence is changing the training experience, what the future of military training might be like, autonomous military drones and robots, and many other very interesting points. Great. Well, Glenn, thank you very much for coming onto the Automated podcast. It's great to finally have you here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, please, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I do with all the guests that I have come on is kind of explain not so much your personal background, but kind of your personal interest in what you're doing. I mean, we'll be talking about Red 6 and kind of military flight training and artificial intelligence as well as augmented reality. But kind of what's your personal interest in the reason that you're on here for the podcast today?
Specifically, more in the automation world, I've been kind of peripherally in the automation world kind of since my beginning of the technical exploration of what I've been doing. I started as a visual effects artist and did more artist side of things, and quickly kind of moved over to the automation side, which is building tools for the artists. And my whole job was to kind of look at how people operate on a daily basis and try to streamline and make their life as efficient as possible. So we used to kind of say that artists shouldn't be doing admin works; they should just be doing art, right? So they just hop in, they just say, "Hey, I am making a file." We make the name for it, the structure, the folder structure for it, put it in the right place, bring the assets, and make it so their life is just about making art. And as I started to get into that, I started to really focus a lot on using Python and C++ to automate, every portion of my life. Like as a young programmer, when you start realizing that you don't have to do things if you just make buttons for the things, it makes you just want to automate everything. And I got really deep into that hole, as I think a lot of programmers do, which is just like, if I have to do something twice or three times, I'm making code for it. Like there's no way I'm doing it a fourth time, right? And you almost get over automated to the point where you're like spending 2 or 3 weeks making a piece of code for something that you would have only taken you a day or two to actually manually do. And after that, I started kind of looking into the ethical side of the larger social problems that are going to come out of the fact of how easy it is to automate so many pieces of our daily lives, and how that starts to remove the humans out of the loop of what we're all doing in our services. And it kind of freaked me out, to be completely honest. Around like 2015 to 2016, I started getting a little freaked out by how many jobs and how many people's work and livelihoods are kind of tied to things that can very easily be automated and very much will be automated quickly. And what does that mean for the larger country, like the world as a whole, for when there will be mass joblessness because of how easy it is to automate most of daily work. And so the Red 6 and what we're doing with Red 6 and how we're utilizing automation is one thing, but the actual, like, my thoughts on the social implications of what the new automated world that's coming toward us is kind of a separate thing. So when I started looking into what your podcast is and how you've been looking at stuff, I was like, this is very interesting. I'd love to talk to this man about these things.
Great. Yeah, I, from what you're just saying, like we definitely share a kind of a very similar vision of what might be happening, kind of around the corner for many countries, if not many parts of the world. It's very, very interesting, but definitely happy to have you coming on today to talk about Red 6 and the kind of flight, the military flight training that you guys have been working on. But I do kind of want to set the stage a little bit. So I haven't talked too much about the military on the podcast, just one or two episodes. But I think that, as we're talking specifically about flight training as it relates to Red 6, maybe we could kind of give a little bit of an overview of that market. There are kind of two key things in the preparation for the discussion with you today that really stood out to me. One was that it costs something like $40,000 per hour to just keep one plane up in the air. I think that was the F-22 Raptor.
F-22.
Which just blew my mind. And then the other thing was that there were, I think it's over 133 just U.S. flight deaths between 2013 and 2017. And that's just in flight training. We're not even talking about active military. Maybe can you explain why this is and maybe tie that into kind of the larger market and the industry that you're working in?
Of course. So the first part of that, the cost of keeping the aircraft in the air is immense, right? So when they look at that, they're not just talking about fuel, they're talking about maintenance costs and the man hours that go into the logistics of just getting this plane in the air and keeping it valid. So I think it's every flight hour is 24 hours worth of maintenance right now on some of the higher end jets. So, because there's so many moving parts, and there's so many things happening in the jet, that when it's pushed as hard as it is in their dogfighting and in their training, it comes back down and the maintenance guys have to pull the entire thing apart and see what needs to be changed if there's an event, but they happen more often than not. They get to the point where some of the guys here talk about having a hangar queen plane that literally is left in the hangar and just stripped of its parts because you're constantly grabbing off and you may not have the reserves of the parts that you need to swap those out. So one jet ends up becoming like the sacrificial lamb that everyone pulls everything off of and kind of make sure the rest of the fleet is working. And so those hours start to really add up. And, when you think about like a logistic team of an F-22 could be anywhere from 5 to 15 people. Those salaries start to build up, and then the pilot salary, then you add on the fuel, and then at the end, the fuel is still very expensive, but everything that goes into just getting that out of that airplane airborne and safe is an immense lift by each of those squadrons. And when we go into the training side of it, when guys want to go up and train, they need someone to train against, and obviously that up until now has been another aircraft. So when you're talking 40,000 hours for one aircraft, that means 80,000 because there's someone going up against him to fly together. So now, not only is it wear and tear on both these planes, but it is a massive cost just to have two of them there. And that's not even taking into consideration that one of those two guys is now acting like a bad guy. So he's not getting positive training for himself that day. He's acting like a bad guy, so the other guy gets positive training. So now those costs just keep kind of compounding on top of each other because now you've spent $40,000 an hour plus the pilot salary for a guy to act as a bad guy, not even to help him train. So now he's less lethal, if you will, in his own right, but he's helped his his squadron mate. So those costs tend to balloon pretty quickly. And the next stage of that is, where do you train? You need to find the space where you're able to have large force engagements where people can have, large sprawling areas. But most bases aren't in an area like that. So you need to take everyone's planes from around the world and come to a spot like Nellis. And it takes, a couple $100 million for the world's air forces to all join there. So, just the logistics train of going from, let's say, Norway to come into Nellis to train at Red Flag may cost the company a few $1 million just to get there before they even go up in the air. So when we started kind of looking at how much those costs actually were, we thought we were being ridiculous. We're looking at the numbers and we're like, there's no way this is what it costs. And we started reaching out to some of the the higher ups, the officers throughout the Air Force, and they're like, actually, you guys underestimated. It's about this much if you include all of NATO. And we're like, geez.
Oh, right.
It's an insane number. And the death side is just tragic. I mean, when it comes to the loss of life in training, especially in aerospace, it's just, we say that the rules of flying are written in blood because almost every rule that you see in the FAA or across the flight training is all because someone had to die or someone had to be injured in order for them to go, wow, this could be an anomaly that can happen. So here's the checklist that we go in to make sure that never happens again. But what the guys are doing up there is extremely dangerous. As much as it may just be, even a rudimentary flight training op where they're just doing tactical turns, where they're just going left and right. They're going 200-300 knots at the low end, and then they have to turn properly with each other and avoid each other. Now, you start getting to really dynamic scenarios where you're doing like basic fighter maneuvers, where they're actually flying to do real dogfighting, and the risk factor just goes through the roof, and it's
Right.
it's extremely dangerous. And the fact that, I mean, I'm done not to downplay it all, but the fact that it is as safe as it is really just a testament to how hard these guys train on the ground and how prepared they get. But we're trying very hard to make that number zero.
Right.
We're trying to get that and make it so that by the time someone gets to a scenario where they may even be injured, they've had so many hours in the plane being away from any possible obstructions that they're completely ready for that. There are just too many young men and women that have gone up there for some of their first sorties and, haven't come back. And it's really sad.
Yeah. I can only imagine. One of the things that also stuck with me as you were saying was how interesting it is how, you have two people going up to train, but only one of them is actually being trained, right? The other one isn't necessarily, I mean, how good can they be pretending, right? If I can put that in air quotes, pretending to be the bad guy.
Exactly.
So how good is the actual training going, even for the person that's, actually being trained? It's very interesting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they're obviously, every plane has different flight characteristics. And on top of that, every military has the way that they leverage those flight characteristics. So, you might have a guy, especially now, so not to go into a different problem, but you may, let's say older years when you had the Gen 4 aircraft. So you have like your F-18s, your F-15s, those aircraft, they were still at least close enough in comparison to the SUs and the, the MiGs of the time that you could almost kind of, you fake it. You have an F-18 go up and they keep a flight parameter in an envelope that makes it so he's moving like a MiG-25 or something, and they're able to replicate it pretty well, and that went forever. That's Top Gun. That's all the movies we watched growing up, and they're able to replicate pretty well. But now moving into the 5th gen with the vector thrust and stealth and all that stuff, we don't have the assets to train against unless you're using another 5th gen aircraft, which means you're now putting wear and tear and losing, like you said, training ability on a 5th gen who may be a frontline guy. So the Air Force has recognized this over the past, 10 years or so, and they started to stand up. Well, they've done this forever, but they're starting to stand up more modern, what they call, aggressor squadrons. So a squadron whose whole purpose is to learn and train and fight like they're, the adversary that we'll be going up against. But again, that's a huge waste of cost. If you have an entire squadron and their entire focus is just to act like bad guys when they go into the fight, then that's an entire squadron worth of waste, kind of. If you have a better way to facilitate that, it's much better. But when you said the flight characteristics side of it, it's all kind of, like you said, it's kind of pretend. As much as you get as close and we understand how they use their jets and how they maneuver, so we can kind of mimic it, and you can train the best you can to mimic it. It's not going to be the same. Like right now with the J-20, which is China's newest jet, and the PAC-FA, or the Su-57 out of Russia. Those are flight envelopes and characteristics that only the intel community has access to right now because they haven't even been demonstrated enough. But in reality, if we were going to go into a conflict in the next few years, those are most likely the frontline jets that we'll be, going up against. And if we keep the paradigm and the training setup that we're using now, the guys that would go up to meet them, the first time they'd ever interact with one of these jets in the way that it would be is in the face of battle, which it's just not how you want to train. Obviously, that's the last thing you want to see. It gets into kind of a deeper conversation. Some of the guys that we're talking to now kind of explain like surface to air missiles and how there's no real way to replicate that threat. They can't fire up a fake missile and have it die, because God forbid anything happened, it'd be massive loss. And so the first time a lot of these guys see a surface to air missile is flying over Afghanistan, flying over Syria, flying over Iraq, and an actual surface air missile comes up at them. So the first time they ever get any type of training or avoidance of that is in a real live situation where they have to make sure they make the right decisions. And so something like augmented reality and automated side of that allows them to kind of get these reps on training and see a sight picture that they won't see until the fight, but now get some actual training and get their head around what that might look like.
No, that's I mean, two things. One, that's absolutely crazy that some of the first times that they're coming up in actual combat is they're coming up in actual combat the first time that they're coming up against these things. But also I think it's a great segue into what Red 6 is doing, right? So maybe you can talk us a little bit about what Red 6 is, how you're using augmented reality within these flight training scenarios and simulations. It's very interesting.
Of course, of course.
Mhm.
Well, thanks so much.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Red Six, as a company, we are trying to remove that risk, cost, and lack of training in those high dynamic situations. So we've developed an augmented reality headset and a platform that lives inside the plane that can, in real time, allow pilots to go up and fly real planes with an augmented reality headset on and see what we call an augmented reality bandit. So bandit's like the code name for when you have an enemy that you're flying against. But
Yep.
you're able to go up there, fly into Camarillo's airspace is where we do it right now. They have a really highly aerobatic demo space that we're able to use, and we drop the visor down, we look out to our right, and there is a augmented reality plane. We use an entire AI stack to drive a lot of its decision making when we go into actual dogfighting, but we also have hands-on throttle and stick control. So the guys on their joystick, if you will, in the front have control over the basic, what we call the basic bandit or the basic wingman. So they can make them do 90 turns back and forth. They can make them climb. They can make them do barrel rolls.
Okay. Okay.
They can put them into engagements where they chase each other. And they kind of, as a training exercise, for the guys that we have here, they're very senior. Most of the test pilots that we've hired are either squadron commanders at some point or 10 plus years of dogfighting. So they almost turn into a video game when they're up there. They're like, okay, if I were fighting a real guy, I'd want him to turn this way, or turn over, do a loop, and I chase after him. So for a pretty long time, that's the only way that they were able to use it, was a very orchestrated, CAN setups, if you will, they were able to trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3 or 4 months ago, we incorporated decision making, like reinforcement learned algorithm to actually drive the decision making, and that came out of the Ace Combat series coming out of DARPA. So they basically trained this to fight an F-16 pilot. We are really good friends with one of the teams that was really high up in that competition, and they were able to take their control level and pump it into our flight physics engine, and basically and instantaneously in the course of about 2 or 3 days have their control stack flying an augmented reality bandit up in the air. So
That's really
we're
cool.
at the point now, it's
Yeah.
it's a wild experience.
Yeah,
It's an absolutely wild experience. So we'll go to check away and then turn in. So like when you're flying with each other, you turn off and then you come across to start the engagement, and then normally in our rated stuff or our CAN stuff, that just goes to the ground. He just does a circle and then levels back out, and you're supposed to chase him to the circle and go off of it.
Mm-hmm.
The AI bandit does whatever he thinks is the best decision at that point, which is a wild experience. I mean, he literally goes straight up into the clouds. He'll duck over himside. He'll go straight to the ground and try to get you to go toward the ground. He'll turn off, and so we've entire like flight safety envelope within there to make sure there's nothing dangerous. But within that envelope, he's pretty aggressive, and it's been a lot of G's have been felt trying to chase that guy recently.
I can only imagine. Yeah, I mean, this is straight out of sci-fi, right? Like there have been some movies that have talked about this. It's very interesting to hear that this is actually now in reality. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And maybe you can discuss a little bit about the pilot themselves, like how realistic are they sensing this augmented reality, because it's just a digital copy of that bandit, as you were saying, right? There is nothing out there except for what they see on the visor. How is the brain really tricked into sensing, into feeling that there is a bandit out there? How does that work?
It's honestly kind of wild. As a non-pilot and as someone who hasn't flown it for years, to me it blows my mind every time. Like obviously, like the coding side of it's fun, and I really enjoy building the software. But when we finally got in the air and I see this thing move, like I've never seen an air-to-air refueling in real person. I've never gotten up behind a 747 and tried to refuel, or I've never chased an F-22 or so. My mind is blown every time, and I'm lost in it. Like I don't know the difference between whether or not it looks perfect. So every time we get up there, I'm like a child, and I'm lost in it. But the front seater guys, man, they get. Oh, sorry, there's knocked the whole table. The front seater guys, they're claiming that it's as real as they feel like it should be in real life. We're still working through the headset. Nothing's perfect yet. It's only our second year. This is our 2.5 prototype currently. So we're still working on a lot of transmittivity and like the brightness of the screen. Resolution is pretty good. So there are things that will cue this isn't real, right? You're still not seeing perfect, human eye resolution images out there, but much like virtual reality, your brain does this takeover where when you're feeling the haptics of moving and doing everything and you're staring at this image, your brain kind of forgets that you're supposed to tell the difference. And so a lot of the times, we'll spend an hour and a half up there just chasing the bandit and just going into rep after rep after rep as if the guys were fighting, and they're giggling in the front seat, and they're ditching over and they're doing barrel rolls and aileron rolls trying to chase this thing. And T-Mac, who's one of our chief pilots, he's an ex-F-18 guy. He's got about 3,200 hours in the F-18 across a few different engagements, and he's my main pilot that I'm with most days, and he's up there laughing and grunting and pulling G's and telling me, hey dude, this is gonna be brutal, and we just pull, and all of a sudden it's 7 G's under a bottom circle to go up and around the guy. But they tell me it's as realistic as it's gonna get until we have a better headset.
Right. Yeah, this is something that I mean, I've been using VR for about a year and a half now, and it's still when I
Nice.
enter one of these digital worlds, I'm always surprised just how easily my mind is tricked to thinking
Right?
that it's an actual thing. I mean, I'm totally aware that it is a digital, a fake world, but my brain somehow is always tricked by it. So I can only imagine that it would be the same, or even more when you have, the wind rushing by you, and you have the throttle in your hands. Very
100%. So that was one of the first things that kind of almost freaked me out about virtual reality. So I started with the DK1 in like 2014, or so, like the beginning of 2014. And the first time we put on the headset, and one of the first experiences was the multiple room like mind trick, where they would like put you on the edge of a table, or the edge of a chair, sitting on top of a building looking over a plank and stuff, and
right.
just started to quickly see how quickly your brain is tricked if the image is given to your eyes. You have a bunch of sensors, if you will, in your body, telling you where you are or how you're standing. Your inner ear, your stomach, all of that are kind of working together to say where you are and what you're doing. But your eyes are in control. And if your eyes get an image, hey, this is where we are and this is what we're doing, the rest of the body just has to catch up. The rest of the body that's why you end up getting queasy and nauseous, is because your inner ear and your stomach are going, no, we are definitely not at the edge of a building. We are not even standing. We're sitting right now. And your brain's going, I don't know. The eyes are saying we're standing and we're at the edge of a building. So I'm going to go with panic right now. Right. And just kind of how easily you're broken out of the actual reality just by putting an image in front of your faces. It's almost kind of terrifying if you really think about it. It's like,
well, especially as we go forward and these kind of AR and VR systems become more and more ubiquitous. In military training, in flight training, but also in just general parts of society. Terrifying, but also fascinating at the same time.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. I mean, that's why I'm here, right? Like the optimist in me is so excited and cannot wait. But the pessimist in me is like, wow, that's kind of terrifying. But but this is why I love doing it, right? There's so many areas where you can, instead of being a replacement, you can be a force multiplier with something like augmented reality. Where you can, what we're looking to do in the first onset is to take what these aggressor squadrons are doing and not replace them completely with AR, but force multiply them. So if you have 5 guys in a squadron, you could have 40 guys in a squadron, because each of them is controlling X number of players, and they can pull themselves out of the safety side of it, where they can maybe be orbiting high and doing like a control zone, or a control maneuver, but telling the AI guys and the AR guys what they should be doing against the real people that are flying. So, with the ability that comes with AR and VR, it's extremely exciting to me. Like there's so many positives, but my brain is always going into the but. Where is this really going?
Of course. One of the questions that I had for you was, previous, I guess I should say, pre-training, before pilots are able to go into an actual jet. This would all be done in a simulator or some sort of mock cockpit, right? How does that? Because I've never done that. I actually have a friend who did in the past. But how does this compare to being in an actual cockpit? And what is now the difference between having your training done when you have an AR headset on? Like what's the difference between those two?
The newer sims are ridiculously high fidelity. Okay. I've got to say they are. The vision, the actual screens that they're giving, especially for something like the Dreamliner or like the F-35 sim, stuff like that, the higher end ones, I mean, they are in the upwards of a few $1 million. And the fidelity you get from it in just the control side of it is fantastic, right? They'll replicate everything to the exact button. They'll have the actual flight computer in the simulator, so anything you're doing will actually act the way it would in the actual plane. And they spend a huge amount of maintenance to make sure that it feels and acts just like the plane. But sorry, I'm getting planes again. Sorry, we're at the hangar, so it's a little loud here.
No worries.
Pardon me. But the thing that you don't get from it is any form of real haptic feedback, because the max you can feel out of it is plus 1G, because they can tilt you back or rotate you on your sides or try to use your body weight as a way to kind of compensate for the fact that you're not moving. So they're great when it comes to training and going through the admin and the logistics sides of what's happening when you're flying. So if you get up in the air and there's an issue, you're not kind of freaking out. You're having all the muscle memory from all the hours you put in the sim, right? Here's this switch. This is where I turn on this avionics. I need to switch this fuel pump. You get very used to that, and you can get really used to the maneuvers and the training you're supposed to do on the ground. But once you get into the air, it's a whole new world. I mean, you're dealing with the actual G's and the load that come from just the flying part, then the cognitive load of figuring out what's around you, moving in three-dimensional space, thinking about your momentum and how you're going to move before you even get into the radios and the logistics of communicating to everyone around you. And then on top of it, you have to train to do what you're trying to do up there. So there's a completely different cognitive load. I'm sorry, not even to mention the safety of flight side of not, keeping an eye on your fuel and figuring out if you can get back to base because you may have run out of fuel. So there's a whole level of things that you're thinking about now that you're in the plane that you never had to in the sim, because you crash in the sim. Okay, let's restart. Let's go back again. It's not the same when you're in the air. If you lose an engine in the air, it's not what's the drill to get to the ground. It's okay, calm down, because right now your life is at risk. Now you need to get to the ground, and so there's stages to it where there's like a classroom that's really important, get everyone into the fundamentals of, how to fly, how the plane works, what you're going to be operating on, get into the sim to actually get your hands on controls of all that. Now they're putting another separate, like, short stage of VR in between that's like a low cost VR to just get tons and tons of reps on actual mission engagements and such. Then they move into a regular plane by themselves with an instructor, with no AR, no other people to work with. Just say, okay, now you're in the plane, take it easy, get used to flying, do all the maneuvers that we just learned in the sims up here in the plane. And then finally, now we're going to add augmented reality into the next stage. So you get to that point now where you're comfortable with the aircraft, you know how all the operational sides of the aircraft work. And now we're going to add in someone to work with, but we're not going to add in a real plane, which is how they do that now. That next stage would be, now there's a real plane, and now you're going to engage, and that real plane will be an instructor, so he knows how to keep himself safe and stay away from it. But there is always risk, and like you said, that number over the past few years has been pretty high, and the loss of life has been entirely too high for something we can mitigate with augmented reality. So now you step up there, and the first time that you're operating in the air against another aircraft is not with a live aircraft. It's with something that very well you could fly through it if you had to, because you didn't understand your momentum at the moment. And if you did, it's not going to be a loss of life.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting to know, because I mean, I could only imagine that there are these levels or these steps between the simulation, training in the plane, and then you're practically in a dogfight or something like that. But now with this new step of having this augmented reality training, it kind of, I guess, it could extend the benefit of training, getting you closer and closer to that real life situation.
Of course. Yeah, we're looking at where this interjects into the different levels of flight training, all the way from what they call their young baby pilots, all the way up to their operational frontline guys, right? And so the operational guys are your F-22s that don't want to go up and train against an F-18 from 40 years ago to get zero training value. They want to go up against an F-22 that has, or a J-20 that has AI that understands the flight characteristics of a J-20 and goes into a really hard dogfight. But we also want to go back to the young guys that just started and make sure that they're able to do safe tactical turns, do a mid-air refueling without having to, both waste the tanker that's up there, because the tankers, the heavy tankers with all the fuel, obviously are extremely expensive. So now if you're going to go up and send a training division up there just to train on how to do the tanking, you're taking one out of commission from a real squadron that might need it, and you're wasting the hours of just doing loops while these guys are used to trying to get up to the boom. Something I just heard over the weekend, while we had our Air Force customers up here this weekend, kind of coming up for a demonstration, and one of the guys mentioned that the first time he ever went up to refueling was over the Atlantic on the way to scene. He had never done it before, ever over the regular, over in a training zone or any of that. First time he ever did it was 4 hours over the Atlantic, and had to go, okay, well, better not screw this up, because I'm not getting home if I do.
That's crazy. Yeah,
it's insane to me. I mean, there's no other profession that I can think of where you would say, hey, this is the first time you're doing the riskiest maneuver of your existence, and it's live on the way there, and if you mess it up, you can't get home. There's no other profession that even has to do that, because of the limitations that come with the cost and the safety of it.
And I guess it's never been possible to do that before, right? Because as you were saying at the very beginning, the costs were just too extreme to I guess have this as a feasible training situation. But now with this, augmented reality possibility, hopefully none of these poor trainee pilots will have to go through something like that in the future.
Exactly. The trial by fire over the ocean into a need to remove that. That needs to never be someone's problem ever again.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have another question about the artificial intelligence that you have
Sure.
training them. So like you said that it has, or you initially got the data from DARPA, right? Or you initially got the actual AI system from DARPA. But is there constant like new data being fed into the protocol from each of the training situations that you go?
Yes, correct. There's actually a so the start of Red Six, the kind of backstory, but it kind of makes sense. The start of Red Six was myself, my partner Dan, and our partner Nick.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, the way it kind of went was we were talking about how the Air Force needs flight training. I knew that Dan had been a pilot before, but I didn't really know a lot about him. And we just said, hey, we'd love to do something in augmented reality, but who the heck's going to give us a plane? And he was like, actually, I'm an F-22 pilot, and I'm building a plane right now, so this could line up perfectly.
Okay.
Let's do that together.
Perfect.
And now, as we've been kind of building this up, we've all been grabbing the people from our past that we think would fit perfectly into Red Six. And Dan has a very, very deep network of F-22 pilots and people he worked with in the Air Force. And one of those guys happens to be a guy named Chris Gentile, who's the call sign Bullpup. And he is a brilliant engineer, test pilot. And since he's left the Air Force, he started to work on an AI, basically a reinforced learning team to kind of develop AI that can dogfight. And so we had him here working with us as kind of a test pilot, helping us go through he was kind of the translator between Dan and I, where he would say, okay, Dan's trying to say this in fighter pilot language, and this is kind of what it means in code. And so he kind of helped us bridge that gap in the beginning. But as he moved into his company now called Epicai, they got involved in a DARPA challenge to kind of go in and do the DARPA initiative to try to train this bandit. But they looked at it much differently than other people did, and partially probably because they had Bullpup on the helm of how they were going to develop this. Instead of just saying, here, go in and do a million reps with a simulated bandit and just get how it turns and fights nose to nose, because all you're trying to do is win that event for the DARPA challenge, which was beat an F-16 pilot. So they knew that if they trained a few million times and the bandit turned in and just went nose to nose, he could win almost every single time, because the pilot isn't allowed to do that in real training. In real training, they go nose to nose, but they break away because of a safety bubble. But the AI bandit doesn't know about that. It just needs to basically figure out a way to turn safely into him and just go straight at him and win. Bullpup looked at it and said, this won't be helpful beyond that first engagement. Like, we need to really think about how this stack is. Teach it as you would a real pilot. What are the rules of engagement? How do you fly? Where would you go? What's a control zone? How do you make sure you win this fight? And remove the actual flight envelope layer from it and just say, here's the decision-making side of it. And so they spent a bunch of time trying to come up with that logic. And then once they had a bandit to train, they handed it back over to us to start to actually train it. So we have, a whole, not a squadron. We try to act like we have a squadron full of fighter pilots over here. And so we took their control solution, built it into a VR sim, and then had all the pilots here do, I think 40 to 60 hours a piece of flying against this bandit and training this bandit over and over and over again. So it went from like a 30 to 40 second fight almost every time, where our guys would just turn up behind him, shoot him, take him out, turn up behind him, shoot him, take him out, to at the end, like a 15-20 minute battle that, the guys were coming out sweating. At one point, Dan fell out of his chair trying to pull really hard G's because he just yanked on the stick as hard as he could, forgetting he was in VR, and fell on the ground. And, so it got much, much stronger. And then as they did their challenge and then they finished their portion, we were at a place where we could actually incorporate it into the AR side of things. So that's when, as I mentioned, that we spent a few days bringing it into our tools, and ever since, it has been getting stronger and stronger every week.
Right.
It's really, really impressive. I mean, like I said, the other day we went up and flew for about an hour and a half, and he almost won a couple times. Like, he puts you in really, really compromising situations where you're like, how the heck does this AI know A, where I am, and B, how to put me here?
And that's really within a short amount of time span that it's been, alive or working, right? You can only imagine in the next 5 years or even less than that. Very, very interesting.
Oh, very much so. I mean, this, if you take Epicai's side, they're, maybe a year and a half into full development of this tool, and we've only been training it since May. So you're looking at less than a year of actual training, and the algorithm is very, very powerful.
Right.
And we're not even actually flying against the expert system right now. We're flying against the high level intermediate, because in the air we are still working out testing. The expert system it probably would put us up there for an hour or so in a pretty hard fight at the moment, but it's a little bit too dynamic for the airspace we're in at the moment.
So if we're talking about this AI system growing and developing within a short amount of time, What do you see as the possible kind of, if we go back to the podcast, the kind of future impact on maybe the jobs of the pilots or those people that are connected to flight training? Will this AI eventually make some of these people redundant, or do you think it'll make the training aspect of these pilots that much more interesting and, I guess, possible for the pilots to be trained better?
Mhm. When it comes specifically to the training of fighter pilots, I think it's one of the few worlds where automation isn't going to remove any jobs. If anything, it's going to enhance people's
Hmm.
ability to
Hmm.
get work there. One of the biggest problems we have right now is we have a pretty massive shortage of fighter pilots and of
Okay.
frontline pilots. And a lot of it comes from the inability to train them properly and the inability to train them quickly. So right now we're basically having a shortage of regular pilots, which means we have a shortage of instructor pilots, which means we have fewer people we can train per year. So as we start to bring AR in, we start to make each of these instructors more, a force multiplier, if you will. We're able to say now you're not just one person, you're an entire squadron. Or from the back seat of a two-seater jet, you can now have 5 or 6 wingmen next to you, that are all completely augmented reality, and you're controlling from an iPad. So that allows us to kind of make faster reps and make faster pilots, which actually will eventually increase the number of pilots we have. I think obviously the automation, not specifically what we're doing, but the automation and the AI side of, you know, the drone world and the logistics side of that side is going to end up taking quite a few jobs when it comes
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
the time of the bombs on target and the logistics moving of things. Over time, we're probably going to move toward a more automated side of that. There's still a lot of what's the word? I guess it's not even doubt. It's kind of a understanding of how important and how impactful the job of each one of these pilots is, and the understanding that any type of added in possible variance or deviation from what you're actually trying to get done is deadly. It can very easily
Yeah.
be deadly to either people on the plane or people on the ground. And so I think there's kind of um, and understanding that automation is not the right tool in a lot of areas for the military specifically. They're
Mhm.
looking at things going, yes, we could automate X, Y, and Z, but what's the risk factor? How does that affect people on the ground? How does that impact my normal calculation of whether or not I should go into an engagement based on the risk it could have for civilians or for collateral in the area? Because as much as we and the automated or in the code world understand what our percentage of successes or what our true correct answers are, they don't normally have a massive consequence. If you make
Mhm.
an automation that works in your office and it doesn't move over the emails properly, then okay, you lost some people's emails. But
Yeah.
God forbid you drop a bomb in the wrong area. It's awful. It's
Yeah.
absolutely awful. So there's been an understood or a very understandable adherence to just not dive right into it and let it take its time to actually mature to the point where it can truly make the right decisions. And a lot of the departments, for instance, DARPA, are going really deep into side by side training for as long as possible until we know that they're actually where they should be. So for instance, you would think that a lot of the drones that go out would be just AI driven, or at least given waypoints to go where they're going, but a lot of them are still handled by a person, just remotely. They're just the person isn't actually in the plane, but they're still the
Mhm.
ones
Mhm.
making the controls, getting it to the area, and making sure that when they drop something, it is truly what they're trying to go after, the target. But it's
Yeah.
go
I
for it,
think
please.
no, I think that's really, really important, because I think a lot of the things that I mean, for us civilians outside of the military,
Mhm.
what we hear a lot is like DARPA building up these killer robots and killer bots and killer drones,
Right,
right?
right,
It's
right.
sensationalized news, but
Of course.
if you're saying that the kind of true fundamental desire is to have still having a human being behind that kill switch,
Of
as
course.
far as you possibly can, then I think that's really important,
Yep.
because there's so many different, as you were saying, like ethical implications of having these, whether it's killer bots or
Mhm.
automated fighter jets in the future. It's really quite a tricky scenario to deal with. Yeah.
No, and what I've learned over my time with the Air Force is they have access to the tools, they have the money to pay for the tools, they have access to the technology.
Hmm.
They are the forefront of the technological world when it comes to the militaries of the
Yeah.
world, but they also are mature enough and nuanced enough in their decision making to go, this isn't the right time for this. Yes, we can do that.
Hmm.
Obviously, we know we can do that, but is it really 100% ready? Even if it's only 90% ready,
Yeah.
98% ready, that 2% risk is too high, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone that we've talked to from the bottom of the chain all the way to the top of command is extremely thoughtful about how they make these decisions and how they actually get to their final decision. As much as we see, like you said, the sensational side of it of, oh, DARPA's doing this and DARPA's doing that. I mean, when you then talk to the guys on the ground who are making the real decisions, they'll tell you that the automated fighter pilot's not coming for at least 50 years, and it's not because the technology isn't there; it's because the trust isn't there, right? So we may end up having the ability or having drones that fly in dogfights in the next 5 to 10 years that can actually really handle the decision-making tree, and that's part of what these DARPA experiments are. But to then take that technology and say, yes, it's ready for frontline. I would say, short of there being an actual World War III where the need is real, because you're now like, okay, we need swarm drones or we need some form to actually help keep things away from our shores. I don't see us moving toward that for at least, I would say minimum 20 to 25 years. And even if the technology is fully matured and automated driving, and maybe we have warehouse robots that are the Amazon pickup box robots,
AGVs,
exactly. If we get to the point where those are great and those are working perfectly, the military still is going to look at that and say, but that's not enough for us, because at the end of the day, their jobs are to get the job done, not to have as much collateral as possible to get the job done. They're all, I don't know a single person in the military I've spoken to that takes that decision lightly. Even the guys who have retired talk about their missions and go, I had to make this decision, and it was the best chance. And we had 5 options on the table, and we Monte Carlo'd them 50 times to see which way would be the absolute minimum risk, and that's the one we went with. And they don't take that lightly at all.
Well, that's just for that, I think I'm really happy that you came onto the podcast, and I think that even listeners out there will feel a little bit more calm, because I think there's a lot of, as I said before, a lot of the news out there is really sensationalism, right? If a lot of these automated systems can be used in 5 to 10 years, a lot of people think, well, just because it can be, it will be, but that's not necessarily the case, and I'm really happy to hear about that.
and there are obviously advocates the whole way up, and it's kind of like it's possibly the only world I've ever worked in where I'm actually happy that the admins have control and IT doesn't. You know what I mean? Because like in a lot of worlds, you work in a normal company and you're like, IT is like, we should buy these computers, we should automate this, and this will save X amount of dollars. And admin looks at the penny pinching side of it and goes, it'll cost us too much, or now we shouldn't do it. So now you've got legacy stuff 20 years old and everything's breaking. And that's terrible. But in the military, if they do that, it's usually maturity and experience speaking, going, that's great that we can automate this right now, but think about the actual ramifications if it goes wrong. And it's a really mature outlook that I actually appreciate a lot in this world.
I completely agree on that point. That's great.
Right.
So maybe moving away a little bit from the automated vehicles themselves, how do you think that the maybe the next 5 to 10 years, referring to augmented reality within training itself, will develop? I read a little bit in one of the articles that Red 6 was in. It was talking about moving beyond just the flight training, maybe moving into different parts of the military that augmented reality could be used. Is that something that you're looking at, or is it still too early?
Of course. No, of course. We so our holistic approach to this has been basically, if a vehicle moves, we want to be able to put people in that with augmented reality that can train. Kind of the technology that we've developed and the technology that we're kind of based off of is the idea that the vehicle or the entity moving becomes almost the HUD, and everyone that's inside of it becomes a character inside that hub, and they're able to get the precise localization of a large vehicle moving in order for them to get the localized training that they need. So, if it's a Humvee or a Stryker going out and doing let's say a trip through Afghanistan or a trip through Baghdad, and they need to be able to do IED training to be able to, spot when things are off, we want to be able to replicate that for them. When we talk to guys who are out on the boats, we want to be able to, have, types of, defense skills and offensive skills, or even, maintenance things throughout aircraft carriers. So our thoughts are really trying to figure out the highest impact areas to remove cost and safety issues from training, and then see how we can implement our technology in that area. We started with the plane because it was the biggest leverage that we had as a team, right? As the silos, if you will, myself, Nick, and Dan, our experience all came together as the plane being the absolute best answer. And on top of it, kind of gave us a lot of added munition, because we have the plane itself, which is normally already the person in there's already wearing a helmet, and they have really high impact and high fidelity GPSs, and they've got really high power availability and stuff. So kind of when we're looking at how to build an augmented reality solution, it kind of has the perfect scenario. It's like the perfect use case. The
Yep.
object itself is flying so quickly that its trajectory is really well known. It's not like a pickup truck where they're just going to stop and then turn left or turn right. He's going 300 knots. It's going to be a large arc that we can predict really well and we can work with really well for our localization. On top of it, you're strapped into a cockpit, so you can't move around so much. So now I can track you as the person that's in the cockpit very, very well with sub-millimeter accuracy and know that I'm always getting that accuracy properly. And then finally, like I said, with the power consumption side, I can put a full computer in the back seat and use an RTX 2080 and pump as much graphics at it as I can to get a really, really good picture to the guys. So we've kind of focused on moving toward the vehicle space because we see that we have all of these advanced, or what's the word I'm even looking for? We get shortcuts, if you will. We get to go, hey, this is the best possible use case for augmented reality as a whole right now. And on top of it, it's an extremely dangerous one where there's extreme cost coming from the military and extreme loss of life coming from the people who outfit the military. So it just kind of set ourselves up as the best possible use case. But as we look into the rest of the training world, it's the exact same problem, like I mentioned with Strikers and Humvees. They'll go out and they'll do simulated IEDs and stuff like that. But until they're actually out in the field, it may not be exactly what's out there. They're trying to do their best, but we can simulate a lot better training with the augmented reality stuff. And we started to look at partners and other groups that are trying to look at the same, kind of like the IVAS project that's going into the Army right now. They're trying to do a on the ground infantry setup of very similar to what we're doing. At first it'll be heads up information. Where's the rest of your squadron? Where's the rest of your platoon? Where's the target that you're going toward? But eventually, there's very good possibilities of being able to put up like a fake kill house and do multiple runs through a scenario. But instead of having a guy with a jacket on, you guys are using paintball guns, it could be augmented reality with live fire on a layer of the range that you can't shoot someone else, right? So now you're getting back to that real haptic feedback, real response and real reactions to the actual munitions and such like that can actually start to happen.
That's fascinating. So really the vision of military training in, pick a number, 10 years down the line or something like that, will be kind of a full layer or vision of augmented reality being used to increase the efficiency and the efficiency of everybody within the military.
Yep, you hit that on the head. I mean, we look at it as a joint battle space that we're developing. We have a software suite called Carbon that we're developing, and it's basically a joint augmented reality battle space. And so that allows people on the ground, people in the air, people out on the sea to basically tune into the exact same network and be able to see the same common operating picture. So they're all seeing, whatever large force engagements coming toward them, whether it's, we've set up multiple aircraft and platoons coming across the ground while ships are coming in off the shores. We can actually set all that up so that our military can actually fight against that without having to waste half of their unit, right? Because right now they do the exact same thing. They train like that, but that entire aggressor squadron, land, sea, and air, are all guys who wear a U.S. uniform who are now getting paid to basically pretend as though they're the bad guys. So now they're all getting back to the provider pilot stuff. They're getting negative training, if you will, because they're trying to act as though they're the guys with different, style of work. So
right.
The long-term goal of this is you're spot on. It's the efficiency and the effectiveness of the training goes through the roof when you start to bring in a joint augmented reality battle space. So you start to everyone see the same, everyone work on the same, and can get the training reps in of how they're going to operate on the ground when they actually go into these scenarios, and not show up day one where you're a young soldier as this is the first time you're really in that. It's the haptic side of it is really the side that's been missing up to this point, is the actual true feeling of being in that zone and being able to see this virtual or augmented picture. It just hasn't been possible yet.
Yeah. I see the time is winding down here. Maybe the final question that I have, slightly connected to what we're talking about. So I'm sure that you're aware of haptics being developed for virtual reality, right? So whether it's gloves, bodysuit, things like that. I've heard it being argued that augmented reality is significantly easier to develop because you don't have to have all of these extra, things that weigh you down, right? The gloves, the bodysuit, the boots, etc. Augmented reality has that haptics kind of built into it, if you will. Do you see maybe that narrative flipping over the next 10 years or so if VR develops further, or do you think that AR will always have that advantage?
And this is kind of my long-term vision. I think at some point we're going to get close to the Matrix. I know this sounds ridiculous. I know it's 50 years out or something like that, but and I don't think it's in the short term that we're going to get to that level of fidelity where the haptics are so good in VR that AR is kind of almost pushed out of the way. But I do think that in short order, just with the amount of people working toward, brain computer interfacing and all of that entire world of trying to make the body connect with computers, we're going to get to a stage where it's going to almost seem silly to try to put on augmented reality headset out in a space. And let's say if you're flying, you're taking in a 200-mile airspace to be able to fly within, it may actually feel that good. I think that's very, very far down the road, I think. But I do see that as a possibility in the future. I think in the short term, a lot, the augmented reality side is just like you said, it's too close. It lends itself too well to the world that we're trying to be in. We're natural beings that have lived as we have for millennia. To then swap that to a completely digital space, I think is going to start to kind of mess with both our psyche and our ability to be social with each other, and just a whole nother level of almost the ethical human side of it starts to get into that side, right? Whereas augmented reality is kind of bringing you back out, and it's kind of making you look back up and look around at the actual world around you, and then just kind of tune that world for the scenario that you should be in if you're trying to do some type of training. But the augmented reality world has its own set of problems, right? So VR in its current state, you're kind of confined to a space where you're able to track with extreme fidelity. And then if you can add haptics in, or you can add a treadmill style running area where you feel like you actually are running and going through them, you kind of get a little bit of both the best worlds, where you get extremely high fidelity tracking, but you also get the movement and some of the haptics. Whereas augmented reality, in most cases, specifically on the ground, you have to do inside out tracking, and you have to make a good enough inside out tracking algorithm that you can deal with really dynamic environments where you're moving through, let's say high wooded areas, or, buildings where you've never mapped those buildings before because it's a brand new, scenario that you're into. So, if you take an engagement where gentlemen are going out and they're doing like a survival night out in the mountains, that entire landscape has to be slammed in real time. And you have to be able to, put people behind trees, to put foxholes down, down maybe 100 yards away, but that may be completely blocked by trees and some brush and maybe some rocks. But your system has to be able to take that in real time, make an occlusion map for that, and then mask it out properly so it feels like it's in real time. Whereas in virtual reality, you have full control of the entire environment, so you don't have to really deal with some of those issues. So I think both of them have a pretty large step they have to take to get to this space where it's almost as good as an actual human just going out there. I'm talking specifically in the humans on the ground walking around space. Like they're both in a stage where neither of them are good enough yet for your everyday soldier to throw on and get effective training, right? That's kind of why, like I mentioned, back to the vehicle side, is the reason we focus so hard on the vehicles is because we knew this is where we could actually get really effective, positive training as soon as possible, as opposed to having to wait until we have extremely long range sensors that are able to make real time occlusion maps of scenario or scenes that have changed since yesterday. And they're coming though. They're definitely getting there. I mean, the stuff that the Quest and the iVest are doing now with the inside out tracking is absolutely remarkable. I mean, it's really, really impressive. And kind of with some of the success that we've been seeing with like the LiDAR that's now on the iPad and Apple iPhone, we're starting to move. We currently are on an EM solution, and that's basically because the scenario that we're in is really high dynamic movement. So any type of optical tracking doesn't really work because our shadows and our aircraft is doing rolls, and the normal features that you would be tracking for are completely moving constantly. So it kind of removes itself. But now we get into some of the really interesting things that they're doing with LiDAR and, not necessarily IR, but, mostly in the LiDAR wavelength, where you can start to cut out some of the anomalies that wouldn't allow you to track previously. And so we're actually moving away from our previous solution and going towards some of these inside out tracking solutions because they're getting that good. So I think in relatively short order, probably in the next few years, we'll start to see areas that are able to real time map at far distances and bring in really, really high fidelity occlusion, which then allows your ground soldiers to just run through the woods as if they're doing an actual engagement with augmented reality assets that they have to work against. So it's pretty wild to see how. I mean, I've been doing this now for what year is it? 2021, only 6 years now, 6 or 7 years, and to go from the DK1, which was nauseating no matter what you did, to where we're at now, where you can put on a Quest and run around your house, and it's gotten extremely impressive. Definitely moving in the right direction.
I mean, I put on my first Quest about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago now, and blew me away, right? So I can only imagine.
Right.
I can only imagine what a 6-year time frame would feel like with all the changes, and then another 6 or another 5 or 6 or even 10 years. Absolutely fascinating, Glenn. I'll have to have you back on to discuss what some of those training scenarios will be like in the future.
I can't wait.
Out. Yeah.
And if we ever get you out in the US, we got to throw you up in one of these bad boys. And
I would love it.
Like.
I'll absolutely love it. I'll have to come down there and do a face-to-face podcast for that.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Glenn, how can people find you, get a hold of you? I'll have the Red 6 website up in the show notes for the podcast. Awesome. How else can people get a hold of you?
I'm like most people over here, I'm stuck to Instagram all day. So if you want to kind of follow us and follow the team, and we post stories every day as to the flight training we're doing and how we're doing with the AI. So my Instagram is @_Glenn GLENN Snyder SNYDER, and then the company is @Red 6 Inc. And we post everything we can as we're going through, because honestly, we're as much as we take this extremely seriously, we're also having a great time developing the software. And it's not every day that you get to do coding in the back seat of a Berkut while it's doing 300 knots upside down. So we tend to try to show everyone how much fun we're having up here sometimes. So please follow along.
Awesome. Yeah, it absolutely sounds like you guys are having a blast.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a ton for coming on, Glenn. Very insightful, very informative. Really appreciate it and enjoy the conversation. So thanks again.
Please, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.